Hey guys, my name is Matthew and today we're going to take a look how to make this super simple game. This is a website version of a game called Rock, Paper and Scissors, so let's start. First, I want to show you what tools do I use for this kind of development. For every project I do a small planning and drawing design, and for this purpose I use Figma, that is a free tool that can everybody get into. As my default IDE I use Visual Studio Code, and for drawing algorithms I use my awesome and classic whiteboard. This is not a super hard project, so we can get right into it. So as you can see, I have prepared some quick and dirty designs in Figma. We are going to use the emojis for the representation of rock, paper and scissors, so it is simple as possible. Okay, so I created a folder that is called game, and first of all we need to set up some files. So first we're going to set up the index.html, and if you're using VS Code, you can just simply type HTML and select this HTML5 and it will create a file structure for you. So we can change the title to game, and the next steps we're going to need to do is to create a new folder for CSS, a new folder for JavaScript, and we're going to create a main CSS file, so main.css, and we are going to link it in our main index HTML file by just simply typing link css /main, and that's it. The next step is to create the main JavaScript file. The process is the same, main.js, but we're not going to link this in the head element, but at the end of the body, so the script will load when the document is almost fully loaded. So we're going to type script source JS, main.js, and we have the file structure ready. Since we have everything set up, we can now start with designing the page and the game. So let's open the Figma and let's copy the background color from there. And we can do this by just copying the fill. And we're going to open the main CSS and we're going to write a body. First of all, we should set the margin to 0, so there won't be any margin. And now we can set the background color with our color that we copied from the Figma. Let's test it out. As you can see, it's working, so everything is fine. The next element we have in the design is the name, or just a header element that will be dynamically changing on the game state, and we're going to create, or we're going to style the h1 for this type of purpose, so the color is white and the text align will be center. The next thing we need to do, we have to import the font, and we can do this by just simply opening the Google Fonts and finding the font. This font is called Albitron and I have the link prepared, so we can do this quickly. Basically, you can just copy the link code from the font, and you can do this almost for any font that Google Fonts has. So that's pretty easy and awesome. And we're going to set the main font. We can do this in body tag, and let's say font family. And the font is named Arbitron, I think. Yes, Arbitron. So we're going to write Arbitron and just copy it here. The next parameter of the font family is the default font if the Arbitron is not loaded. So we can write the classic sans serif. If we add the H1, we can see that the font is the Arbitron that we have in the design. As a next step, we need to create some kind of container that will hold and wrap all these game elements, and we can just simply do this by creating a div, and we can insert the h1 into the div, and we're going to call it, let's say, container. And now we need to center the container. We can do this by typing container and position absolute. We are not using flexbox at this moment, so we are going just to do a simple way with absolute position. We're going to say top is 50%, left is 50%, and since we need to center it by the element's position, we need to type transform, translate, and move it to the center. If you're going to test it out now, we can see that the game is in center, so this is working. And now we can continue with coding the game area, and basically we need to code this 3 elements, which is basically a P element because the emoji is actually the text, and the score counter, as we might call it. So I'm going to create inside the container div a div that is called that has a class game area. And inside this div, I'm going to create a 3 P tags. And the first P element is going to be the choice of us, basically, because this is our side. The left side is always the, let's say, friendly player, and the right side will be the enemy player, the AI that we are going to play against. I can just copy the emoji from this P tag from the Figma, and I can insert it here as a placeholder. The next P will be the score counter, so I'm going to write basically 0, 0, and I'm going to assign a class that will be called score counter. For the first P, I'm going to assign a class that will be called a player, and the last step is to create another P that will be the enemy player, let's say. I'm going to put a placeholder here, we're going to change it later, and I'm going to assign a class as player. We can use it too because there is no visual difference between the player, only the IDs will be different. And now we need to style it. So let's style first of all the game area, and this is not hard, we just need to set the width for max content, and we need to center it. So we're gonna write display block, and margin for left is going to be auto, and margin for right is going to be auto as the margin before. Thanks to this, we now have a centered div. And as I said, we need to set the width to max content. Just there was a typo. And now we can style the player and score counter. Because we want to display it in line, we need to, well, set the display in line. And I'm just going to create a class for the player class, and this will have display inline block. And I'm going to do this for the score counter too, so we can test it out. Display inline block. And if we refresh the index, we can see now that we have all the 3 elements, even they are a bit smaller, but we will fix it. They are in line, in one line, and they are not under each other. Okay, so now let's start with styling the score counter. Figma is a super because you can switch to this code tab and you have CSS code prepared. It does not work for everything, but this is cool for some basic stuff like font size, line height, etc. So we're going to copy the font size and the line height, and we can copy the color. I forgot to copy the C, so C, nice. And since the height of each element will be different, we need to set for the player vertical align to middle and vertical align middle for the score counter. If I refresh it, you can see that the score counter is styled, which is cool. And now we need to style those 2 elements, and we can do this line, we can do this by border bottom, and the space between we can do just by typing a padding. So let's set for the player padding of 24 pixels and border bottom of 1 pixel height solid, and the color we're going to copy from there. So here we go. And as you can see, the line is displaying, but the font is still small, so we're going to fix this, and we can fix this by copying the font size, which is actually there. We can remove the line height because we did the space by typing the padding. And as you can see, we have the elements, but there is a huge margin on the top of each other. So we're going to fix this globally by typing .p and setting actually not .p, globally just by p. Margin top is going to be 0 and margin bottom is going to be 0 too. There is no required .px sign, so let's refresh it. And as you can see, there are no margins at all. Only the header has the margin, which is correct. So now we need to do those margins that we can just simply assign to the score counter, and we can do margin left, let's say 16px, and margin right 16 pixels. Oh, I said 16 and wrote 18, cool. And we're gonna refresh this. And now we have to create those player options, which is rock, scissors, and paper. So this is pretty similar what we did before, and we just have to create another div, and we can call this, let's say, options wrapper, and we can create, let's say, a p tag again with the rock, scissors, and paper. And now if we reload the index, we can see that this is under each other, so we need to set a display inline, and we can do this by just simply typing dot options wrapper p and display inline block. And let's check what the size it is. It's 72 and line height is 90. So let's copy it here. Let's refresh it. Okay, so it is inline. Now we need to set a small space between them. So let's type margin, and 24 pixels should do the work. Now we need to center those options, and we can do this by setting the margin to the options wrapper. So display block, margin left will be auto, margin right will be auto too. And let's check the space between those wrappers. By holding option, we can see the space that there is between each element, and this is 132, so we can type margin top 132 pixels. Let's refresh it, and we need to set the width to max content, so this will work. Cool. Now I want to change the cursor when we hover over the options, so we can set cursor pointer, and we will set a transition. Yeah, there's missing I. Transition 250 milliseconds and ease, because I want to scale it up a bit when we will hover on those options, and we can do this by just assigning a hover event and transform scale, and the multiplier will be 1.1. So if we refresh it, we can check it now, and yes, it is getting bigger once the mouse is over the element. Okay, and now we can move on to the JavaScript side, where we will create a class which is going to be called a game or a game manager, and we will take care of the logic there. Okay, and now we can take care of the magic, of the JavaScript magic that will make the game work. Now we can create a class called game manager, and we are going to create a constructor, which is a method that is called when the object is created. And because it is a function or method in class, we need to pass some arguments that we will describe later. And we need to pass a few IDs for the elements, and because we have to connect those elements, piece divs to JavaScript. And we are going to do this once the class game manager will be created. So we want to pass those IDs. We have a score element, so we need to pass the score ID. This same applies for the player, so player ID. We have enemy, so let's pass the enemy ID. And now we can pass the IDs for each of the options for the player. So rock ID, paper ID, and scissors ID. We have a header, so we can pass it to as let's say info ID, so we can display the user what is the state of the game, if he won or if lost. So now we need to create a element, and we're not going to pass the IDs. We're going to actually create variables that will hold the elements. So we're going to call this score L as element, and we're going to call document get element by ID. We're going to pass the score ID, and now in the score L we have the score, we have the element that is taken from the score ID. We have to, or we don't have to, but we will create another element for the player. So player L. Again, we're going to change the variable, and we're going to repeat this till we have all the elements. So enemy L, enemy ID, rock ID, rock L. We can separate this as score enemy and player options. This paper L is document get element. Oh, I forgot to dot get element by ID, and we need to pass the paper ID, and we have to do this for the rest of this. So scissors, and the last one is the game state header, let's say, let's call this, and will be info L. Actually, I got a new keyboard, so this is kind of a new feeling for writing this. So that's it. We have set up the base elements, and now we can create a few variables that we will need, such as this options, and we will create a JSON, and basically we can say that option with number 0 is going to be scissors, option with number 1 is going to be, let's say, a rock, and the option with number 2 is going to be actually the paper. We're gonna comment this as the JSON of options. And now we will create another JSON, and this JSON will be, let's call it images, even those are not images, but you know. And we can now copy the scissors, and the number 1 is rock, so let's copy the rock. The number 2 is the paper, so let's copy the paper. And we have the JSON with emojis. Okay, now we need to create a score variables. This player score is 0 because this is called when the object is created, so this is the default state. And enemy score is 0 also. And now we need to set the click events for those elements. But before, we need to create a function that will be called when we click the option. So we can create a method that will be called, let's say, play, and this will accept a variable that will be a number one of the options. So we're going to call this, let's say, player choice. And what we need to do, we need to randomize the enemy choice. And this method will be something like next play step, for example. And we need a little addition, because we need a function that will return a randomized integer. So we can just basically copy this function that is from Mozilla documentation, Mozilla docs or something like that. And as you can see, this returns a random integer. And now we can create a variable enemy choice, and the choice will be created from this option, and the index of the array or of the JSON will be get random int, and this will be between the indexes of 0 and 3. So 0 is the minimum and 3 is the maximum. the function is never going to return the 3 because that's the maximum. It will just return some number between the interval of 0 to 2, even if there is a number 3. But before extending the actual play method, we need another method that will check if we actually won or if we lost. So that would enable the more modularity and the more clean code instead of writing all of the game logic into one method. So we're going to create a method that will be called, let's say, evaluate. And this will accept the player choice and the enemy choice. And simply now we need to create an if statement, and the first condition will be if the player choice is same as the enemy choice, we will return a state that is called draw. As the next step, since this game is about different combinations, all combinations that there are is like 3 combinations that will allow the user to win, because all other combinations are just lost for us. We can create an else if, and this will be if the player choice is a rock, and rock can beat the scissors. So if the player choice is rock and the enemy choice is scissors, we can return that we won. Another if is if the player choice is a paper and paper can beat only the rock. So if the enemy choice is rock, actually I forgot to. So if the enemy choice is rock, we can return that we win or we won. And the last combination in order to win is if the player choice is scissors and the enemy's combination is, the enemy choice is paper, we can return that we win. All the other combinations are just a lost game for us, so return you lost. Okay. So now we have completed the evaluate method and we can complete the play method. We need to do small changes. We want to store indexes in order to show the user the images and the options. So let's create a method that's player index. That will be the same as the player choice. And let's create enemy index that is going to be get random integer between the numbers of 0 and 3. Now we can create a variable let player, or we can just set a value for player choice to this option and the player index. This will return any of those options. The same we can do for the enemy. So enemy choice is going to be this option, this option, and the enemy index. So now we have variables that returns the choice of us as a player and the choice of the enemy, which is returned randomly by this random function. And now we need to see if we actually won or if we lost. So we can create let a variable for result, and this will take any of those strings. So let's call this evaluate, and we need to pass the player choice, which is actually the player choice, and the enemy choice, which is enemy choice. I'm sorry, I had to take a call, but let's complete this. So we are going to function evaluate and passing the player choice and enemy choice. So now we will have the string, like the result string in the result variable, and Now we can handle what should happen if we will win. If the result is win, we should get a score. So player score. And if we won't win, the enemy will get the score. So this enemy score plus plus. So we're going to increment this, and this will happen if the result is you lost. We have a one stage or state of the game that is draw. So else the draw will do nothing, because, well, draw is just draw. Or we can add score for both sides. That would be cool. And now we need to show this calculation to the user, to the client. So we need to update UI, and we will create a method update UI, and this will handle all the updating of the scores and the choices that player or enemy made. So because we want to update choices, we need to pass the B index, which is player index, and the E index, which is the enemy index. But now we have to update the score. So we'll type this score element inner HTML, and this is going to be made from this player element and this enemy score, or not the player element, the player score. And now we can take care of the player ID and the enemy ID, like those placeholders, and this player element in HTML will be this images and the index of B index, and the same for the enemy element, which is going to be enemy element and inner HTML, and this is going to be this is equals to this images and the E index as the enemy. And now we can call the function in the play method, and we need to pass the player index, and the enemy index. Now we haven't subscribed the events yet. So what we basically need to do, we need to set up the onClick event, which we can do by, let's say we're gonna comment this as setting the scores. Remember, always comment your code because that's useful. And event subscriptions. We're going to type this rock element onClick, and we can create a arrow function. And what we will do is we're going to call the play method. So this display, and the player choice will be, since this is a rock element, this is going to be a integer of number 1 because that's the rock. And we're going to do this for the rest of the elements. So this paper element will call the number 2, and the scissors element, the scissors, not scissors ID, okay, there is some typo. I'm going to repair this scissor element to scissors element, cool, and this will call the number 0. Okay, so we have made the logic, and now we can implement it to our game. So basically we need to call the game manager with those parameters. So we need to set the IDs for the containers, for the divs, and for the stuff that we want to change and connect with the JS. So let's connect the score ID and just assign ID score, to the player assign ID player, to the enemy assign ID enemy, and let's assign ID to the rock, to the scissors, and to the paper also the header will assign info ID. we will create a new script tag and we will call let game a new game manager, and we will pass the information or the IDs. So it starts with score ID. So let's pass the score. The next is player and enemy. So player, enemy, and player enemy rock ID. So rock. What's the next? Paper, scissors, and info. Paper, scissors, and the info. And now we can test it out. So we will refresh this. And let's say I want to play with scissors. Oh, this time I lost. But it seems like we forgot to implement to update the UI in terms of info. So we can do this by extending the update UI method, and this will accept a result, and we will pass the result. And we need to do this. Info element in the HTML is equals to result. We can now refresh it, and let's say we will choose the paper, and we lost again. We will choose the rock. We lost again. So try to, okay, we lost again. Okay, and finally we have a draw. Let's take a look if we can win. Oh yeah, we can. So it is working, it seems, but the AI is so OP at this moment. Okay, so as you can see, this works, and this is based on the enemy that returns a random number, which the chance of hitting any of those elements should be like 33%. As you can see, it is working. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm gonna put this on the GitHub so you can download it if it's necessary, or you can take a look at the code in just general. So I guess see you next time.